Okay, Kaylee, James Parker, how's it going, mate? Thanks for sending me your golf swinging again, mate. It's been a while, a couple of years since I took a look at it last, I think. So yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. So just going through your questionnaire that you filled out, mate. So the problem, you're playing off about a 12 handicap. You want to get down to single figures. You're shooting about 84, so you want to get down to single figures. So you want to, drop 4 or 5 shots, get into the 70s, and you're complaining of a pull and a pull hook, right? So it's my job then to kind of go through your swing, right? You tell me that you're observing a pull hook, so it's really my job to go through and start off by diagnosing the problem, right? So the first thing I want to just bring to your attention is the club face, right? What the club face is doing, and talk about that, the role of that throughout the golf swing. So setup wise, it looks, the shaft could definitely be leaning forward a little bit more in the setup. We'll talk about that a little bit later when I pull up a few examples. But also looks, it's difficult to really get a. It would help if you got a stick there, right? If you had a stick there, another stick there, what you get your toes on, and it just looks like your club face is a little bit open at setup, right? Now I might be wrong, right? But that's kind of what it looks like a little bit. So part of the problem might be in your setup. But certainly as you start swinging, mate, with regards to the role of the club face, and let's just look at the club face first. So, as we get to P2, the toes kind of sticking up in the air, so that tells me that it's open already. As we get up to the top, again, club face is in kind of an open position, and then as we start to come down, coming down into P6, again, very open. Let me just draw a line there. You can see where that club face is, very open position, just coming down into P6, down just before impact, right? So from there, you're coming down a little bit over the top. You can see your hands are coming down kind of through your right shoulder. The club's coming down through your right shoulder. So, what I'm looking at from this position now, 95% of people from this position are going to hit some kind of a fade or a slice, right? Because the club face is open. What you actually end up doing is you start to kind of get your hands working a little bit more. So I'm sure you're feeling through impact that club face is rotating way too much. You feel like there's a lot of rotation going in the club face, right? And then through impact here, you've got a lot of hand action going on, right? So I just want to point that out first, right? That what the club's doing, the club face is doing, it looks a little open at address. It's definitely open at takeaway. It's definitely open at the top. It's definitely open by the time you come down to P6. And then you really have to get your hands involved, and you get that right hand flipping look, right? So what I'm seeing through impact here is a left hand that started to break down, a left hand that started to bend instead of bow, right? And a right hand that has started to flex, right, or bow, right? So your right hand's flipping it, your left hand's cupping it, right, which is the opposite of what we want. I'll show you some examples of that in a second, right? So don't forget, you're telling me that you're pull hooking it, right? So I'm looking at what you're doing in your movement patterns to that could possibly produce that sort of action, right? Especially when you're swinging faster, with the longer clubs, the mid to long irons, and especially your woods. Driver most of all, right? You're swinging that the fastest. So, trying to time this open club face to get it back to square requires a lot of like hand action, right? We want hand action. We want the correct sort of wrist angles, but it looks like you're timing it a lot, right? You've got to flip that hand over to get that club face back to something like square. And obviously you're going to do it a little too much sometimes, and then that's going to produce that pull and that hook, that closed club face, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to point that out. And then going into what your what your actual body's doing. So think of it like this, like setup wise, that the head is a little bit too much over your right side, right? You can see how your head's kind of set up already. Instead of it being in the middle of your stance, it's kind of leaning over on towards your right foot. So that's the first thing. And then as we go back, big sort of rotation as you get up to the top, right? And that's what I noticed from this angle. It's like instead of stopping around there, right, which is kind of where you see the pros, right, with a kind of shorter arm swing, the handle stays a little bit more in front of them. You're getting the club right, and also the club head is going to stay behind your hands here, right? But you're over rotating, and you're getting the club across the line a little bit, right? And you can really see it from this angle. If we draw some lines now, well, your shoulders are way past 90 degrees. At a guess, your hips have turned 50, 55 degrees to be able to turn your upper body that much, right? And then what that does is that then, because you've turned so much going back, you've over rotated on the backswing, you've then got a lack of turn coming through. So what I'm seeing coming down into impact here is, certainly down into P6, your shoulders are still pointing off to the right. Right, we can still see a lot of your left shoulder, a lot of your left chest, right? So what we really want as we start to come down, but we have to be in a position at the top of the swing to be able to do this. And I'm just talking about the patterns of the pros. What we want is coming down into P5, which is left arm parallel with the ground. We want to see the hips back to 0, which they are there, so that's pretty good. But by the time we're coming back down to P6 here, we want the shoulders back to 0. But so you can see your shoulders are still pointing very much to the right, okay, which is conducive with someone that swings it a little bit too much into out, and also therefore are lacking in their turns, right? And whenever someone's lacking in their turns, right? Whenever someone's lacking in their turns, a pattern that we start to see is that the handle or the hands never quite get forward enough by the time you get down to impact. So if I draw a circle where your hands are now, that's impact, right? And you can see how, you've got that sort of angle through at impact, at the moment of truth, right, as you're hitting it, right? You see the pros, and I'll do this in blue. The pros, their hands, their left arms there, their hands are there, and the club is more there, right? That's sort of where you see the pros. But to get your hands forward at that position, you've got to turn harder, right? So at impact, what we want to try and get is hips out the way. So you've definitely got your hips out the way. You can see a little bit of your left butt cheek, right? But you can see your shoulders now are kind of back to zero. We want your shoulders out of the way as well. We want your shoulders turning 30 odd degrees. We want your hips turning 30 odd degrees. That's at impact, right? And then as you do that, you've definitely slid your hips forward, right? So you've got some right tilt. But as you start to turn harder with your upper body, with your torso, you'll start to see your hands get a little bit more forward there as well, right? Which will produce less of a flip, right? If your hands are more forward, if the handle's more forward, you're going to get more forward shaft lean and less of a flip, so that club face won't turn over as much, right? So that's kind of what I'm seeing in your movement pattern, mate. So it's a bit of the club face, right? I'm seeing a little bit open at the start, and then open in the takeaway. Definitely open at the top. We're over rotating. It's definitely open as you get there. Then you got to start to flip it, and because your hands aren't forward enough, and you haven't opened your turns enough, right? Your turns are still closed. You've then got to kind of flip that club face, right? So we want to get rid of the flip. So to get rid of the flip, we need to turn our body harder, we need to turn our torso harder, and we need to get our hands more forward at impact. All right. So how do we do it? What changes need to take place to change the shot pattern, right? That's really, before that was the diagnosis, just now is what we decide to do to make the changes. What changes need to take place. So the first thing I would recommend, let's get rid of these lines. First thing I would recommend is a shorter backswing, mate. All right, so let's get a model up. I think a good example for you would be someone like Zach Johnson. Right. And you can see the difference in the setup as well. I mean, look at the angle of the shaft. Look how he's moving. Look how he's leaning his shaft more forward. Right. Look how he's got his head in the middle of his stance, whereas yours is kind of lean. Your upper body's leaning over to the right a little bit. Right. So I would get your head more in the middle, and then just have your belt buckle just a little bit more in front of that. So I'd get your belt buckle more towards your left foot, not quite over it, but certainly, the bias with the lower body. If we draw a little circle here where his belt buckle is, you can see how that's sort of, the bias is towards his lead foot. So the lower body is going to be close to the lead foot, but upper body we want in the middle of the stance. Okay. And then what I'd do is I would work on shortening your swing. Right, so you can see as Zach gets up to the top there, I already had the lines set for shoulders and hips. And then as we get you up to the top, and we do the same with you for shoulders and hips. Right, big difference, right? Big difference. So that's the first thing I would do. And the way I would do that is a few different things. The first one, I would work on left knee, right? So yes, obviously we want the knees to change flex. We want the right leg to straighten a little bit, the left leg to flex a little bit. So the left knee is going to kind of come down and in a little bit. But you can see as he gets to the top there, his left knee's still pretty much over his left foot. It's moved inward a little bit. It's moved downward a little bit, right? But you can see how that left knee's just moved inward from his setup position, down and in, right? You look at your backswing and you look how much that left leg kind of banks in there, and it's just collapsing a little bit too much for me, right? So this how this left leg's collapsing is allowing your hips to turn too much, which allows your upper body to turn too much. Now don't forget, we want to shorten your backswing, shorten your turns, so that by the time you get back to P6 and impact, you've turned out the way more, right? So all this is going to be like a knock-on effect. If we can get you more that position, right? If we just get rid of these lines, right? If we can get you more in that position, but keep your knee sort of over here instead of it kind of banking down this way, right? You can see there, and we look at the top of Zach's swing there. Now we're starting to see some similarities, right? Now the handle's shorter, right? Whereas you carry on all the way back there, you over rotate, so you turn too much going back, you close your turns too much, and then by the time you're coming down into impact, you can't open your turns enough, right? So that leads to the handle being too far back at impact. That leads to the flip with the hands, right? So if get rid of those lines, if you shorten your turns, right, then you can open your turns more as you come down. You can get your hands more forward at impact, right? And then what we want to try and do, if we can open our turns more through impact, is then we want to try and keep, and then if your hands are forward more, because you've opened your turns more, your hands are going to be more forward, then we're starting to look for less of a breakdown with the wrists, right? So you can see, probably a good example would be maybe there when the shaft's starting to lean away from the target, right? So the club head's overtaking your hands. When his club head starts to lean away, let's say there, right? But look at the difference in where the hands are compared to where his hands are. So he can get his right hand over here. He can keep his right hand a bit more bent. The shaft's still down here. Yours is kind of always flipping. It's going to have that tendency to flip, right? Because your hands aren't forward enough, because we're not turning enough. And you're not turning enough through impact because you're overturning going back. Get rid of those lines, right? So I hope that makes sense. The other one, mate, I'll get your swing up again. The other one, with regards to shortening your turns on the way back, would be just getting your hands moving more inward, right? Getting your hands moving more inward. Again, if we pull up Zach. Right, so you can see how his hands have moved inward a little bit more, right? But also look at the club face there compared to your club face, right? So the pattern that you see with the pros is, if you move your hands inward a little bit more, then what you'll start to see is the club and your hands go up through the base of your bicep, through the base of the right bicep, right? And then as they come down through the middle of the right bicep, right? So hands and shaft come down through the middle of the bicep. So go back, base of the bicep there, you can see his shaft and the hands kind of going through the bottom of his bicep, the base of his bicep, and then they come down a little bit over the top of that, right? That's because we're turning hard, all that sort of stuff, so the handle starts to come down. This is just, observing the patterns of the pros, most of them. There's always exceptions, but, most of them, then the handle and the club come through the base of the bicep, right? What you're doing is you're going back, and you can see as you go back, your hands and the club are kind of going at the top of your bicep, if not through your shoulder, right? And then as you come down a little bit over the top of that, kind of through the shoulder, right? Hands and the shaft coming down through the shoulder. So a little bit over the top than what we want, right? Little bit over the top of what we want, and it's a weird one, your swing, because yes, the shaft is coming over the top of you know, the average tour pro, if you like, and then we're not turning hard enough, but we're not turning hard enough because of your over rotation, right? So I just wanted to point that one out for you as well. Right, that's an important one. So just move your hands inward, right? That's the best way to think about it, right? And just move. Get rid of those lines. Just get a stick on the ground. Instead of having a stick over your toes, I would have a stick, and I would have it maybe about 20 degrees inward. So instead of having the stick there, I would just bank it inward a little bit, and then I would just try and get your hands to follow that stick on the ground, right? At the moment, your hands are just coming back a bit too straight, okay? And then let's get your swing up again from face on. And then the next thing we want to work on is the face rotation, right? So, you know, it's like I said, like I pointed out at the start, it looks a little bit open at the start, and then it's open at the top, open down to P6, and then you got to flip it to kind of square it up, right? So we want to kind of take all that rotation out a little bit. So the way I would start working on that is and I agree with your little email that you sent me over. I agree that your left hand's a little weak, right? So I agree that your left hand, you know, the line in your left thumb is kind of pointing up over there. So it's kind of pointing up towards your left shoulder, right? And also, you know, the on your glove, there's a bit of black Velcro. We can hardly see that. Right, if we pull up, again, if we use Zach as an example, and we zoom in, right, look at how much he's turned his left hand over, right? So the line in his left thumb would be pointing up there somewhere, right? Strong left hand pointing up to his right. You know, that's quite excessively strong left hand. But don't forget, I want to see that club face a bit more closed in your takeaway. So I would get your wrap your Velcro over a little bit, right, this way. And I would try and get the line in your thumb, instead of it pointing to your left shoulder, I would try and wrap your hand over to get it pointing over to your right shoulder, like you see Zach's. Yeah. Okay, mate. So that would be your little evaluation, mate. A few things that we talked about, and don't forget, it all revolves around what the ball. You know, I'm not standing behind you, observing the ball flight. We haven't got a track man telling me what your pattern is for the last 20-30 shots, right? I'm trusting you that you're telling me you're hooking it, you're pulling it, you're hooking it. So what we talked about all revolves around that shot pattern. Okay. So if you have any questions or anything like that, I'm going to shoot you an email over in a bit. Just talking about what I went over. But if you have any questions or anything, just shoot me over a text or an email or something, and I'll get back to you. Cheers, Kaylee.